Welcome to the Real Talk Cyber Podcast. My name is Jake Seller, and today we got quite the episode in store for you. Incident response. Des, you brought this one up. You said we got to talk about this, or else our homies out there are going to start getting fired if they don't have an IR plan. What made you think about this topic and think that we should talk about it?
I think that every day people are starting to see the headlines. If you're not seeing an IT outage, then you're seeing a security breach. You're seeing geopolitical tensions create impacts to business, which are now creating incidents. Incidents aren't just like cyber attacks themselves specifically. There's a lot of other nuances. Natural disasters fall into there. So I think that if you're not thinking about this topic specifically, from an availability perspective, kind of hitting the CIA triad when we're talking about it, I think that you're setting yourself up for failure. So I think this is a great topic to start with and really to talk through.
Out of curiosity, just to set the stage for this episode, do either of you guys have a really good ransomware or incident attack scenario or cyber attack scenario? Or maybe not necessarily a scenario, but like an event in your life where you were part of something like that.
Yes, I have.
Yeah, me too.
Des,
None that I could talk about.
Yeah,
can you
you got to be
enlighten us
careful.
without telling us the name of the company? What happened? What went down? What the impact was?
Yeah, so I can I got to be careful in how much I can say because obviously I'm still, floating around and everything along those lines. There's been a few that really keeps you up. I would say one of the ones that probably had one of the larger impacts was not even a direct hit to the organization itself. It was through a vendor specifically. So essentially at an organization, we had a vendor that got hit with ransomware. And because of that, we couldn't get clear answers from them. We understood what our dependencies and everything were. So what we did was we severed our connection with them until they could validate and verify that they were clean. Turns out that it would have had a drastic impact on our business. We found out about it on Thursday, severed connection Thursday. Friday rolled around. If we would have rolled into like the timeline from a RTO perspective was like, if this process is down for a week, it would have created such a backlog that it would have created a huge headache for us. And that vendor was a single point of failure that had historically been identified by the organization. And we had no type of compensating controls, no secondary options. It would have been a manual process for the business unit, or we would have, fallen out of SLA with other clients, customers, whoever that we were supposed to deliver on. And it would have created a regulatory and legal ramifications as well. I would say that overall, the team did a very, very good job handling the incident. Executive leadership jumped straight into it, had their hands all the way in the dirt on it. We had conversations, but those early days of communication of what's going on, what's the impact and all those things, everyone understood those things, but they weren't as finely documented as we wanted them to be, even though they were very well understood. So, I mean, it would have ultimately, we were able to get the answers we needed to get for them. And we were able to get everything up and rolling within a few days, right? So we were able to, reconnect with them and go through everything. And we worked with their security team very, very closely. Kudos to them, even though everyone will remain nameless in this incident. But that right there in and of itself was a huge event for us. If we would have allowed it to play out, it would have had terrible impacts long term.
Man, dude. One time in my lifetime, I was working with this retail company, medium size, like 150,000, 200,000, 150 million, 200 million in revenue. And they got hit and their backups got encrypted. And then they paid the Bitcoin fee and it got deleted. And so what happened to them was, dude, they were starting from ground zero. I don't even know if they ever came back from that. They were losing $80,000 a day and it was getting really bad. And so I don't think they ever came back from that. But with that being said, it's a response. Great topic for today. So in this day and age, I talk to almost every single leader in IT, especially in the SMB space. Not every single, but a good percentage, especially in the SMB space. And they don't have an IR plan. We come in, we offer compliance, and then all of a sudden they're like, "Oh, IR plan? How do we do this? How do we test this out?" I guess a good place to start would be What have you guys seen in the marketplace, and what's the core problem here when it comes to incident response and people's preparedness around it?
Yeah. I think probably the biggest thing that I'm seeing, and this is keep in mind from a consultant side, is the inability to sort of define what could be an incident in their environment, right? That's kind of why people don't know where to start. And of course, like we were talking about at the top of this, it reaches outside of just technical or IT incidents, right? We're talking about environmental and really anything that can happen from a data compromisation standpoint. We need to ensure that we are defining what levels of our organization can be touched in the event of an indicator of compromise. And then we're defining that by criticality, right? There's going to be parts of your organization that won't necessarily be, I shouldn't say as important, but we're going to have sort of a tiered criticality system when it comes to your incidents. But I think the overall crux that I'm seeing a lot of the times is just lack of contingency planning on the whole. And when we think about incident response is kind of the middle ground when it comes to contingency planning. When I say contingency planning, that means having proactive, active, and then reactive plans in place. So your incident response plan kind of comes in the middle of that journey. But first, we need to have a business continuity plan in place typically so that we understand what we're doing proactively to keep sort of that our infrastructure in place, both technical and administrative. Then incident response plan typically comes right in the middle of that, right? So, okay, indicator compromised. We've been hacked. What do we do now? And then you have your backup and disaster recovery plan. So, sort of like when everything's gone off the rails and you've already done your incident response activities, you circle around and you get your test your backups, do all of your disaster recovery, do your lessons learned, if you will. That sort of trifecta is missing from a lot of organizations, and they need to work in tandem.
So, Joe, there's a lot of IT leaders that are just like, hey, I don't have enough time to build this IR plan. Like, I've got enough plans I got to build, I've got enough processes I got to document. Like, what are some of the implications for our IT leaders of not having a solid IR?
Well, the implication is if there was any sort of compromise, you wouldn't know how to react. That's the implication,
What
right?
would that and
That means loss of business in general, right? That means that you typically won't be compliant. That means your reputation takes a hit, right? Because when we're thinking about an IR plan, it encompasses, again, more so than the technical. It encompasses your communication chains between, your incident response teams, all the way up to HR, to finance, to legal, right? And each one of those teams or those silos, if you will, has a specific responsibility in that incident response plan at the time of an incident and you don't have an incident response plan, obviously the obvious implication is, well, we don't know what to do, but the amount of individuals and the amount of potential customers, clients that can be impacted because of not having solid planning is astronomical, really. I'd say for those organizations that are really worried about this right now and don't have anything in place, think about your reputation first and foremost, right? Think about your business. This is going to take a tremendous hit. Any sort of indicator compromise is going to create a disaster, if you will, across your organization, across your clients, and whomever your organization touches if you don't have anything in place.
Yeah, I'm sure not having a plan can make things go a lot slower when something happens because you're building the plan as you go. Des, would you add anything to that? Anything about, why it's important to have an IR plan? What are the implications to our IT leaders who don't have an IR plan?
Yeah, no, a few things. Number one, incident response is a part of your job. So there could never be, I'm too busy for incident response because it's inevitable at some point in time, you're going to find yourself in an incident. And I always say, and this is something that has always been a staple when you talk about business continuity, is it's not the plan itself, it's the planning. It's the phase of actually working through and building the plan that offers the maximum amount of value for you when you go through it. So I'll add a couple clarifying points to what Joe's going. Joe's right on point when it comes to this though. Is that it's a lot of the proactive and reactive work that you have to do in order to prepare yourself for a potential incident. Now, when you talk about business continuity, make sure we're clear. Business continuity planning specifically is going to be birthed out of your business processes by way of your threat and hazards identification risk assessment, what we call a THERA. Also, it's going to be birthed out of what's called a business impact analysis or your BIA. That lets you know everything that should then therefore be in scope You should understand the impact, your dependencies, secondary, tertiary effects of if a threat and hazard that you have identified materializes and turns into an actual incident, right? That has to be done right up front. The business continuity plan that's birthed out of that is designed then for how is the business going to interact. This is where business leadership is involved. How do we continue to carry out our process if we have technology that's been degraded, we have a natural disaster, if we have a security threat, like let's say physical in our actual buildings, and we are like in on site, what does that look like, right? It could be fires, whatever. How is the business going to interact? How do we do our job still irrespective of that? Okay. The other piece of that that Joe brought up was disaster recovery. Now, typically, when we're talking about disaster recovery, we're talking about IT disaster recovery specifically. We're talking about how do you make sure that your applications are backed up? How do your applications continue to function? Or how do you recover those applications in the event of an actual, let's say, degradation or ransomware, anything along those lines? Right. Now, those two plans lead you down to two other plans, which would be your incident response plan in the event that there is an incident. You have incident happens here at the top. That should trigger your business continuity plan and your disaster recovery plan. The process of how you handle all of those things as an organization is going to fall within your incident response plan. Incident triggered plans are then activated. What's the process? Who needs to be involved based on what type of incident you actually find yourself into? Now, to take it just a slight step forward, another piece that we have to keep in mind too is incidents, worst case scenario, can become crises. And that's where your crisis management plan comes into play. That's when, hey, everything has completely fallen apart. Here we are, we're at a Sev 1 that's going to continue to go for a long period of time. We need to get our crisis management team pulled in. Across business continuity, disaster recovery, incident response, crisis management, those are various teams that you have to stand up in your organization that has the skill set to be able to see you through the actual incident, the actual event itself. So you need people that has a high enough level of leadership in the organization to make money making decisions, and that also have the teams underneath them that have the expertise from an operational and tactical level perspective, where once it happens, they know how to respond. And the incident response plan gives you the methodology to be able to work through all of those things.
And so it seems like when building this, an ideal incident response plan, there's a lot of elements. In some situations like three, and I'm sure that process of building the teams, the resources, all those different elements take some time. Is if our listeners, a lot of them have very limited resources and very limited time. If they wanted to kind of do that first rendition of this and focus on like, hey, these are the 20% of things that I can do today to get 80% of the results, where should that person start? I mean, where and what should that person focus on for really their version one with the ambitions of getting to what you just described, Des, is like version three of their our plan.
Well, I
Joe,
would say that
yeah,
the
yeah,
first thing the first thing that they need to do in that situation is document how they currently operate. That's the easiest way.
yeah.
Once I document what we currently do when things go wrong, now I can build on top of that and keep working from there. From that point, your initial step should be to go through the exercise of knowing thyself. That's where you start going through your risk assessments and your business impact analysis to understand, like, okay, what are the most critical things inside of your environment? And then to start to build according to that, right? So that would be the foundational steps. I would say first document what you're currently doing and then start to implement best practices and get leadership buy-in from that point on how you need to operate proceeding going forward. But it's a point of maturation. The beauty of this process though is the investment that you make as a leader is in time. It doesn't necessarily require the financial resource in order to stand this up. It requires the time and the leadership buy in. in order to really accomplish it.
Joe, would you add anything to that? I mean, I think another element that I'm also curious about too is when these IT leaders are thinking through different scenarios or different incidents, like are there certain incidents that they should focus on when thinking about the 20% to prepare for or anything like that? Joe, would you add anything to what Des is saying here? And
Yeah, and I just to add to that too, I think that testing and exercising, to Joe's point, is at the end of the day, it is one of the most critical aspects once the plan is documented to ensure that it actually functions the way it's intended to function. Typically, what happens is people document a plan, and then what happens, they go into said scenario or said incident, and then they fly by the seat of their pants because they've never trained on it, they've never tested it, they've never seen if it's viable. So then next thing you know, you start going through incident, and now it's just whatever your natural reaction to the problem is, that's what you go to. Testing and exercising calls those issues out, and then you're able to mature your process going forward once you collect your after action items and other things along those lines too, in order to actually go through the process of further maturation, right? It's so critical, even when you take it a step further into some of the other things we were talking about. Yeah, tabletop exercising is important for you to know your incident process. But this also flows into when we start talking about disaster recovery as well, and we start talking about testing our backups, right? Or we start talking about capacity testing and all of the other things that happen throughout the let's say software development lifecycle process too. All of that testing, what people think is if it's some form of performance testing, I always say that's a form of resilience testing, right?
yeah,
Because you want to know how is your application going to function under certain scenarios so that you could obviously build in like, all right, cool. We know if we get so many users at a period of point in time, we're going to see latency. Well, all right, cool. That means that we have to add more capacity if we expect it to be more. So you start to find those opportunities, but testing and exercising is just as important as documenting the plan because if you don't, the first time that you go through an incident, you don't want that to be the first time that anyone actually broke open the plan and actually went through a scenario where they had to follow the process.
yeah. So like testing is the feedback loop. Like you create the process, but then do some sort of testing to validate and get feedback. So in many senses, either you can improve the process or at least build familiarity with the process and probably do it on a reoccurring basis so your process gets better and better and better and stays up to date.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
This is the thing that where I get tripped up, guys. For those companies, like I was telling about that one company, 50 to 150 million in revenue, like not a ton of resources. How do like how as IT leaders do we, sell internally the need for, you know, doing an IR because you can go pay for a tabletop or pay for an IR plan and it's, 15 to $50,000 in some situations. Like how do these IT leaders really sell internally on how to get some of these additional resources? Or should they not even look externally? Should they really be focused, with the resources today with AI? Like should they try and build these plans on their own? I don't know. Do you guys have any thoughts on that thought process?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on this process. A couple things. Number one, this is something that is better done internally yourself, to be honest. So if you don't have the skill set, I would strongly recommend that you start to go through some form of training to actually acquire it. Because when the incident happens, it's not going to be Joe the consultant that's going to show up, right? It's going to be you. Like boots on the ground, you're going to have to respond, you're going to have to react, and no one is ever going to know your environment better than you. That's number one. And so, as far as getting the buy in for it, typically what happens and where people go wrong, this is one of those issues they try to sell out of compliance. And I completely disagree with that. You need to go to business leadership with what is important to them, which is hey, if we want to grow and expand our footprint into Europe and Asia over the next 10 years. All right, cool. Absolutely. We can definitely do that. Guess what's going to kill those aspirations? If we have a large scale incident and we're not able to support our customers in the US, that by itself, how are we going to expand under fire? That's it's a non-issue. We can't, right? So let's start working through, hey, this is where our gaps are. the reason that we're going through this form of testing and we want to have this program stood up from business continuity, resilience, incident response. The reason we do all of these things is because, to Joe's point earlier, the reputational impact if something goes wrong, the financial impact if something goes wrong, the regulatory impact if something goes wrong, the operational impact if something goes wrong. And this is all what captured in your BIA. And I could keep going. Your loss scenarios in the situation where if it all goes wrong. And in the world that we live in, it's not if, it's when we have an incident. And again, when we even look at it, it's not this large or this huge chasm between what we think can happen and what will happen. You see incidents within the United States of America government. You see the incidents with every single country's government. These are sovereign funds that can print money, right? And if they have incidents, what makes you think that you won't? Look at your largest Fortune 500 companies. They have incidents. How many times have we seen it where people are trying to watch a fight on Netflix, who I always say does resilience probably better than anyone in the world in many regards, based on how proactive they are. They have latency when people are trying to watch Mike Tyson and, you know what I mean, like Jake Paul. So you start thinking about this holistically and you start to say, we will have an incident, and what's all of the impacts of if this materializes and we didn't invest this little bit of money, this little bit of time in order to make sure that we didn't have that. And so then it becomes a cost benefit analysis. This goes back into what I always say. When you are a leader in an organization, you have to speak the language of business. You have to speak in dollars and cents, and you have to let people know why it matters.
Yeah. So like the compliance pitch is kind of, in many senses, a crutch. Like you don't need to even use that as a pitch if you really understand your business and really understand the impact to your business. Like it's like,
Yeah, it's an immature, respectfully, compliance as the argument is an immature rationale that a leader sells because they can't articulate none of the other things I just said,
yeah, we have
right?
to. We should do it.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
versus, hey, these are all the reasons. And by the way, we need to be compliant.
Exactly. That's the icing on top of the cake.
Yeah. What about you, Joe? You have any thoughts on that? It's so frustrating to me when I'm going into some of these environments and I'm seeing, you know, not a lot of maturity from the security standpoint, and they have such personal information for customers, their social security number. I mean, just all these people and a lot of these companies, it's one thing, to protect themselves, to maintain business, but there's also this certain level of responsibility where, hey, people are trusting you with their personal information. Like old people who don't know how to protect themselves against identity theft and those elements. It's just so like selfish from my perspective. To
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is a conversation for another time, but I feel, I think compliance is an attempt to protect against a lot of these things. But in reality, just because people are compliant doesn't mean like they're the most secure. And so while compliance kind of gives these people that crutch of pitching, how to protect their business in more detail, or it gives them a crutch on how to sell some of these security ideas or security technology. I sometimes think it's just not solving the root cause, which is the question of how do we actually restore peace of mind from cyber attacks? It's, hey, this is kind of a band-aid requirement, but it's not really accomplishing the end goal. Yeah. Awesome. Well, good stuff, guys. Well, another successful podcast. Feel free to like, subscribe, comment, compliance if you want us to chat more about compliance. And I think we'll close it out today, guys. See you guys. Have a good one.
Peace.